let's get talking. I guess I'll just call this one Freestyle Blackology. Okay, so right now what we're looking at is haplogroup E1B1C, which is also known as E1B1A2. Haplogroup E-M329 or E1B1A2 is a haplogroup, a group of similar haplotypes that share a common ancestor with a single nucleotide polymorphism mutation. It is defined by the SNP mutation M329. Note 1. The majority of the cases observed have been found in East Africa. It has been found in ancient DNA isolated from a 4,500-year-old Ethiopian fossil called Mota. And the citations are 5, 6, and 1 of this Wikipedia article. This haplogroup is frequent in southwestern Ethiopia, especially among Omotic-speaking populations. Semino et al., 2004, found two Ethiopian Oromo in a study of over 2,400 individuals, including 78 Oromo. Cardenas et al., 2007, found one case in Qatar out of 72 people tested there in that study. Okay, so just to show you what people, that's where it's located. The ancestor is EV38, and well, like I say, this is going to be random, so that's that. Um, we'll get to what Omotic uh, people look like, but this is just showing a Berber from the Draw River Valley. You actually have more Negroid Berbers in the Draw River Valley of Morocco. And this is an article, if I can get, come on, from Science, magazine Science. This is speaking on Near Eastern and Sub-Saharan ancestry found in ancient Morocco. It says, Humphrey and her Moroccan colleagues got a chance to test this view after they discovered 14 individuals associated with Ibero-Mauritian artifacts at the back of the Gros de Pigeon cave in 2005. Paleogeneticist Marika van der Loostrecht and Johannes Kraus of the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, SHH, in Jena, Germany, with Matthias Meyer of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, used state-of-the-art methods to extract DNA from the ear bones of skeletons that had lain undisturbed since they were buried about 15,000 years ago. That's a major technical feat because ancient DNA degrades rapidly in warm climates. These samples are almost twice as old as any other DNA obtained from humans in Africa. DNA in hand, van der Loostrecht and Chungwang Zhong, also of SHH, were able to analyze genetic material from the cell's nucleus in 5 people and maternally inherited mitochondrial DNA from 7 people. But they found no genetic tie to ancient Europeans. Instead, the ancient Ibero-Maurusians appeared to be related to Middle Easterners and other Africans. They shared about 2/3 of their genetic ancestry with Natufians, hunter-gatherers who lived in the Middle East 14,500 to 11,000 years ago, and one-third were sub-Saharan Africans, who were most closely related to West Africans in the Hadza of Tanzania. The Ibero-Mauritanians lived before the Natufians, but they were not their direct ancestors. The Natufians lacked DNA from Africa, Krauss says. This suggests that both groups inherited their shared DNA from a larger population that lived in North Africa or the Middle East more than 15,000 years ago, the team reports today in Science. So this article was back in 15th March 2018. So we'll close this up. Usually, more what people refer to as Negroid ancestry and the Amazigh or Berber people is explained away as being basically due to the slave trade. However, apparently there were people who, based upon their genetics, were or had a good deal of Negroid ancestry 15,000 years ago, which is well before the transatlantic slave trade. And what actually happened is that more people who were more, more Caucasoid, if you want to use that term, migrated into North Africa and basically outbred the original, I guess you can call them black Berber people, but I guess some of them found refugia, and so that is why we have people who look like her, or at least that is a possible reason. Reason. And this is just an image. Well, it will be an image once I find it. They're going to show the pictures? Where are the pictures? I don't get why I don't see the pictures. Okay, wait. Okay, here we go. Well, okay, so these are what we expect when we see Berbers. This one seems to have, I guess, somewhat of a more Negroid and image phenotype. Her, maybe the same person. Yep. But this is what we expect. Again, somewhat traces. It's just showing, okay, these are less so, more typical. Okay, they're just some of the, says what a site that some would argue was pseudo, so we're just going by the images and not so much what is this here, okay? But again, if there were people who had sub-Saharan DNA 15,000 years ago, then we cannot rule out them maybe looking something like this, especially since they actually were already about 65% Near Eastern or Middle Eastern. This is just showing you again the same. Well, this is a different article, but this one is from Natural History Museum by James McNish, first published 16th March 2018. It's showing where they did the excavation. It's the dig that they did. Ancient human DNA recovered from the oldest cemetery in Africa. It says museum archaeologists were part of an international team uncovering clues to the people who lived in North Africa 15,000 years ago. The results show that the people share genetic ancestry with populations from both the Near East and sub-Saharan Africa, but not from Europe. This is the first and the oldest DNA of our species recovered in Africa, explains Abdeljalil Bouzagar from INSAP, Institut National des Sciences de l'Archéologie et du Patrimoine in Rabat, Morocco. And I don't speak French, so if I butchered that, so be it, or sorry about that. So let's see, what does it go on? It says, while we know that present-day North Africans share a majority of their ancestry with present-day Near Easterners and less so with sub-Saharan Africans, we do not know when the connection would have first happened. Or the cemetery in Africa, and these are some of the stone tools they used. It says, okay, here, early population connection. The researchers found that the people living in the cave 15,000 years ago had two major components to their genetic heritage. About 2/3 were related to populations who lived at the same time in the Near East. The other third is most similar to sub-Saharan Africans, in particular West Africans. The results show that the connection between North Africa and the Near East began much earlier than many previously thought, and the Sahara was not an impassable barrier. Clearly, human populations were interacting much more with the groups from other, more distant areas than was previously assumed, concludes Professor Johannes Krauss from the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, where the DNA analysis was performed. Further studies in this region could shed more light about where these different populations came from and when and how they interacted. So that's that there. We can close out this. We're going back, look again at this. So there were people who may have looked like her in Morocco 15,000 years ago, or even perhaps like her 15,000 years ago. I don't know exactly what a person who is 1/3 African looks like. I don't know exactly even what Natufian people are supposed to have looked like. But we can't now just assume, that the original people of North Africa were simply white. If this will ever open. If this will ever open. Okay, so these are modern Berbers. And modern Berbers, or more modern Amazigh people, have more ties to Europe and the Levant than do the Ibero Mauritians. I'll say this is going to be very random. We're just freestyling here, so things are not necessarily going to come together in maybe the most coherent way. But this is a YouTuber who is like an anti We Was Kings, anti Hotep person, and he champions the case that there were never any black people in North Africa. However, we just saw the article saying that, that 1/3 of the Ibero Mauritian DNA was sub Saharan African, which means that there were people, if sub Saharan African is synonymous with black, there were people who were black who were living in North Africa, and they mixed with people who came from the Middle East or Western Asia to create the Ibero Mauritian population. Okay, so closing this out, back to Berbers again. Okay, so now this is Nubia. This is Nubia right here. There is Lower Nubia and there is Upper Nubia, which is, I guess, an imitation of Upper and Lower Egypt. Upper Nubia is actually in the south, while Lower Nubia is in the north, just as uh, lower, no, just as Upper Egypt is in the south, and Lower Egypt is in the north. Now, Egypt is considered as being a North African country. So, how Nubia could be in Egypt and Nubians not be considered North Africans, I don't understand. But the YouTuber I showed you does not consider Nubians as being North Africans in order to keep with his uh, teaching that there are no indigenous black North Africans. But then we get into whether or not Nubians should even be considered black. There are some who say that in order to be considered black, and there's some who use black as synonymous with African, you have to have Afro textured hair. Okay? But this Nubian does not have so called Afro textured hair. But of course, if you are African, or if we argue that Nubians are an African people, then whatever hair type they have would have to be African by default. Unless, of course, we can argue, or unless we argue that this hair texture that this man has was introduced by back migration into Africa. But we do not know the origins, the full origins of straight versus curly hair in humans. I would venture to guess that based upon us being mammals, and based upon most mammals having straight hair, that curly hair is a derived trait that our earlier primate ancestors had straight hair, as most apes, which, like it or not, religious people we are, that curly hair preceded, not preceded, that curly hair came after straight hair. So who knows, maybe his hair is actually closer to an ancestral form. I don't know if the hair, you know, if there was a graduation from something like this and it got curlier and curlier until we got the peppercorn hair of the Khoisan people? Or could it be that the peppercorn hair of Khoisan people is divergent, since they are genetically a rather divergent group? But closing that out and closing this out, and now going to a South Arabian. So we can see that his skin is quite dark. This is what people from Yemen, some of them look like. Apparently, he doesn't seem to have some of the skin lightening genetic markers. So he must, I'm guessing, have SLC24A5 in his ancestral uh, allele, the ancestral SNP, or else his skin would probably be quite a bit lighter than this man's skin happens to be. Okay, so this Omotic man is a representation, a possible representation of what carriers of E1B1A looked like before they migrated westward to, well, West Africa. Okay, so it says here, haplogroup E-M329 or E1B1A2 is a haplogroup, a group of similar haplotypes that share a common ancestor with a single nucleotide polymorphism mutation. It is defined by SNP mutation M329. And they go on farther. I'm skipping some stuff. Here it says that it has been found in ancient DNA isolated from a 4,500-year-old Ethiopian fossil called Moda. This haplogroup is frequent in southwestern Ethiopia, especially among Omotic-speaking populations. Okay, so let me see. This is the ancestor EV38. The ancestor of EV38 was E-P2. Descendants are EM2 and E-M329. Okay, E-M2. Haplogroup E-M2 is a human Y chromosome DNA haplogroup. It is primarily distributed in sub-Saharan Africa. E-M2 is the predominant subclade in Western Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, and the African Great Lakes, and occurs at moderate frequencies in North Africa and Middle East. E-M2 has several subclades, but many of these subhaplogroups are included in either E-L485 or E-U175. E-M2 is especially common in native Africans speaking Niger-Congo languages and was spread in southern and eastern Africa through the Bantu expansion. Okay, so this is just showing you the distribution of it. And the descendants are E-Z5994 and E-V43. All right, it's the ancient DNA. It says medical DNA. Amid the Green Sahara, the mutation for sickle cell originated in the Sahara or in the northwest forest region of western central Africa, e.g. Cameroon, by at least 7,300 years ago, though possibly as early as 22,000 years ago. The ancestral sickle cell haplotype to modern haplotypes, e.g. Cameroon/Central African Republic and Benin/Senegal haplotypes, may have first arose in the ancestors of modern West Africans bearing haplogroups E1B1A1, L-L485 and E1B1A-U175, or their ancestral haplogroup E1B1